My name is Natalie. I'm 34 years old, and the day I stood in my lawyer's office, holding a thick folder of private investigator reports, was the day I realized karma has a twisted sense of humor. My sister Margot had hired expensive investigators to prove I was lying about our mother's will, to paint me as a manipulative fraud who'd stolen her inheritance. Instead, those same investigators accidentally uncovered evidence of Margot's own massive financial crimes, insurance fraud totaling over $800,000. The woman who raised me to always tell the truth had just tried to destroy me with lies, and karma had other plans. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when everything fell apart. Before I tell you how my sister's weapon became my shield, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever dealt with family betrayal, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is going to take you on a wild ride through manipulation, private investigators, courtroom drama, and the sweetest justice I never saw coming. Let's dive into part 2, where you'll meet the golden child and the scapegoat. Growing up, my family had roles that were set in stone before I could even understand what they meant. There was my mother Patricia, my sister Margot, who was 4 years older than me, and then there was me, always trailing behind in everyone's estimation. Margot was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my mother's eyes. She had this way of lighting up a room, turning on the charm like flipping a switch, and everyone fell for it every single time. By the time she hit her 20s, she'd landed a high-paying job as a marketing executive in Boston, drove a sleek Mercedes, wore designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and lived in this gorgeous townhouse that looked like something out of a magazine. Meanwhile, I became an accountant, practical and responsible, the kind of person who double-checks receipts and keeps color-coded spreadsheets for household expenses. After my divorce 3 years ago, I was raising my daughter Lily on my own in a modest apartment, juggling bills and trying to make ends meet while my ex-husband complained about child support. The favoritism started when we were kids and never really stopped. I remember this one incident when I was in 8th grade, and money went missing from my mother's purse. Margot had taken it to buy concert tickets for herself and her boyfriend, but when Mom discovered the missing cash, Margot immediately pointed at me with tears in her perfect eyes and said I must have stolen it to buy drugs or something equally ridiculous. I was 13 years old, spent most of my time reading library books and doing homework, but Mom believed Margot without question. I got grounded for 2 months, lost all my privileges, and had to endure lectures about honesty and trust, while Margot went to that concert and posted photos all over social media. Nobody ever apologized when the truth came out months later, when Margot let it slip during an argument that she'd taken the money. Mom just waved it off, saying mistakes happen, and we should move forward. That pattern repeated itself throughout our lives. When it came time for college, Mom gave Margot extra money from the fund she'd set aside because Margot needed it more for her expensive private university experience. I ended up working 3 jobs to pay for state school, barely sleeping between classes and shifts at the campus bookstore, the coffee shop, and weekend tutoring sessions. As adults, Margot and I maintained what you might call surface-level civility at family gatherings. We'd show up for Thanksgiving and Christmas, exchange pleasantries, and pretend everything was fine while Mom gushed about Margot's latest promotion or her new luxury handbag. I focused on being a good mother to Lily, who was 9 years old and the brightest light in my life. Every compliment Mom gave Margot came with an implicit criticism of me. Why couldn't I be more ambitious like my sister? Why didn't I have a bigger house, a better car, a more impressive career? The comparisons wore me down over the years, and I learned to keep my distance emotionally, to protect myself and my daughter from the constant feeling of not being enough. But deep down, in that place I tried not to examine too closely. I still hoped that someday Margot and I might have a genuine relationship, that she might see me as an ally instead of competition. I held on to that foolish hope right up until the moment Mom got sick, and I discovered just how far my sister was willing to go to maintain her position as the favorite, even after Mom was gone. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Mom's doctor delivered the news that would change everything. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer with a prognosis of maybe 6 months if we were lucky. The tumor had already spread, and treatment options were limited to managing pain and symptoms rather than pursuing any kind of cure. I remember dropping the phone and just staring at the wall of my cubicle at work, unable to process what I'd just heard. My mother, who'd always seemed invincible despite her flaws, was dying. Without hesitation, I requested a leave of absence from my accounting firm, packed up essentials for Lily and myself, and moved into Mom's house to provide full-time care. Someone had to be there around the clock to manage the increasingly complex medication schedule, to help with feeding tubes and personal care, to coordinate with hospice workers and handle the thousand small tasks that come with end-of-life care. I knew it would be hard, knew it would drain my savings and test my limits, but Mom was still my mother, and she needed me. Margot's response was predictably minimal. She visited twice a month, always armed with expensive flower arrangements that looked beautiful but did nothing to ease Mom's suffering. She'd breeze in on a Saturday afternoon, stay for maybe an hour, take carefully staged photos of herself holding Mom's hand or adjusting her blankets, and then post them on social media with heartfelt captions about how hard it was to watch her beloved mother decline. The comments would pour in, people praising Margot's devotion and strength, while I was the one changing soiled sheets at 3 in the morning, crushing pills into applesauce because Mom couldn't swallow properly anymore, holding the basin when she vomited, and trying to comfort her through the pain that medication could only dull but never eliminate. Margot always had excuses for why she couldn't stay longer or visit more often. Work commitments, important meetings, a business trip she absolutely couldn't reschedule. She'd hug me on her way out and tell me I was doing such a good job, in this tone that made it clear she thought caregiving was somehow my natural role, while her important career justified her absence. The financial strain hit hard and fast. Mom's insurance covered some expenses, but there were gaps everywhere. Specialized equipment and medications that weren't fully covered. Home modifications to make her more comfortable, supplemental care supplies that added up to hundreds of dollars every week. I dipped into my savings, the emergency fund I'd built so carefully over years of careful budgeting, watching it disappear as I tried to give Mom the dignity and comfort she deserved. Lily spent more time with her father during this period, and I hated missing those months of her life, hated that she was seeing me exhausted and stressed, but there was no other choice. The emotional toll was harder than the physical exhaustion. Watching someone you love deteriorate, losing pieces of themselves day by day, knowing there's nothing you can do to stop it, creates a special kind of grief that starts long before they actually die. Then something shifted. During her lucid moments, which became less frequent as the disease progressed, Mom started really looking at me, seeing me in a way she never had before. She'd reach for my hand and whisper apologies that caught me off guard. "I wasn't fair to you," she'd say, tears sliding down her sunken cheeks. "I saw what I wanted to see with Margot, not what was really there." She talked about wanting to make things right, about how she'd spent too many years playing favorites, and it was one of her biggest regrets. She mentioned changing her will, making sure I was taken care of, acknowledging the sacrifices I'd made, not just during her illness but throughout my life. Those conversations were precious to me, moments of connection I'd craved my entire childhood, but they also triggered something dangerous. Margot must have overheard one of these conversations during one of her brief visits, because suddenly her behavior changed dramatically. She started showing up more frequently, and she always brought along this lawyer friend of hers, claiming they were just helping Mom organize her paperwork and make sure everything was in order. "You're poisoning her mind against me," she hissed, low enough that Mom couldn't hear from her position in bed. "You just want her money. You're taking advantage of her vulnerability. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to steal what's rightfully mine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her I didn't care about money, that I cared about Mom being comfortable and respected in her final months, that maybe if she'd bothered to show up and do actual caregiving, she'd understand what this was really about. She threatened me then, said she was documenting everything, that she had friends who could testify to my manipulation, that she'd call Adult Protective Services if she had to. The argument woke Mom, who became distressed, and I had to end the fight to calm her down while Margot stormed out. After that, Margot's campaign against me intensified in ways I didn't fully understand until later. She started recording snippets of conversations, editing them to sound incriminating. She took photos of the house on bad days when I hadn't had time to clean, making it look like I was neglecting Mom's environment. She called family members with concerns about my fitness to be the primary caregiver, painting a picture of me as unstable and potentially abusive. She created this false narrative so convincing that some relatives actually called to check on the situation, and I had to defend myself against accusations that had no basis in reality. It was my first real taste of how far Margot would go, how completely she was willing to lie and manipulate, to protect what she saw as her interests. But I had no idea that this was just the beginning, that the real attacks were still coming, and that my sister's determination to prove I was the villain would eventually become the very thing that exposed her own crimes. Mom passed away on a quiet Thursday evening in September, with me holding her hand and reading her favorite poetry. Her breathing had been shallow for hours, and when it finally stopped, there was almost a sense of peace, a release from the pain that had consumed her final months. I sat with her body for a long time before calling the hospice nurse, crying quietly and telling her all the things I wished I'd said more often. Margot arrived about 30 minutes after Mom died, bursting into the room with dramatic sobs that seemed performative compared to the private grief it just experienced. She cried loudly enough for the nurses to hear, clutching Mom's cold hand and wailing about how she should have been there, how she'd lost her chance to say goodbye. The funeral was an extension of that performance, with Margot delivering a beautiful eulogy about their special bond, about how Mom had always been her best friend and closest confidant, painting a picture of their relationship that bore little resemblance to reality. I stayed quiet throughout the service, too numb with genuine grief to fight her for narrative control, accepting condolences from relatives who had no idea what the last 6 months had really been like. 2 weeks after we buried Mom, Margot and I sat in the office of Mom's lawyer, a kind older man named Richard Pemberton who'd handled her affairs for 20 years. The will reading felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than my actual life. Richard opened the document and began reading in his measured voice, and I watched Margot's expression change from confident expectation to confusion to barely suppressed rage. Mom had left me the house, a modest 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood worth approximately $450,000. She'd left me her investment accounts, carefully managed funds totaling about $200,000. The jewelry and personal items were to be divided equally between us. There was a small trust fund, $50,000, set aside specifically for Lily's education with instructions that it could only be used for college expenses. And to Margot, Mom left $10,000 and a letter. Richard handed Margot the sealed envelope, and she tore it open with shaking hands. Her face went pale as she read, and then Richard asked if she wanted him to read it aloud for the record. She nodded stiffly, and his voice filled the quiet office with Mom's final words to her golden child. Patricia had written about how she'd enabled Margot's worst tendencies, how she'd given her money and praise without requiring responsibility or growth, how she hoped this decision would teach Margot something valuable about earning rather than expecting. She acknowledged that Natalie had sacrificed everything for family, had been the strong one, the reliable one, and this inheritance was meant to balance the scales after a lifetime of unfair treatment. The letter ended with an expression of love, but also a challenge for Margot to become the person Mom had always pretended she was. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. Margot shot to her feet, screaming accusations across Richard's desk. "She manipulated Mom," Margot shrieked, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "She isolated her, poisoned her mind, probably forged this whole thing because there's no way Mom would actually do this. She's a liar and a thief and I'm going to prove it." Richard tried to calm her down, explaining that he'd personally supervised the creation of this will, that Patricia had been completely lucid and clear about her intentions, that everything was legal and proper. But Margot wasn't listening. She gathered her designer handbag, knocked over her chair, and stormed out of the office, slamming the door so hard that the framed law degree on the wall shook. I sat frozen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. I hadn't expected Mom to leave me so much, hadn't been taking care of her with any expectation of financial reward. The relief I felt about Lily's college fund was mixed with guilt, because despite everything, I still loved my sister, and some part of me had hoped this wouldn't drive an even deeper wedge between us. But Margot wasn't done, not even close. Within days, she launched a comprehensive smear campaign designed to destroy my reputation and paint herself as the victim of elaborate fraud. She posted on social media about elder abuse, carefully crafted messages that didn't name me directly but made it clear who she was talking about. She called every single member of our extended family, aunts and uncles and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, telling them her version of events with herself as the devoted daughter who'd been shut out by her manipulative sister. She created a Facebook group called Justice for Patricia, where she posted out of context text messages. I'd sent her photos edited to make Mom's care look inadequate, and encouraged others to share their concerns about what had really happened. The comments section filled with people I'd never met calling me horrible names, demanding I be investigated, suggesting I should be in prison. My cousins stopped returning my calls. Aunt Helen, who'd been close to me as a child, sent a cold email saying she was disappointed in me and didn't want further contact. Uncle James posted on the Facebook group about how he'd always known there was something off about me. My reputation in our family and community was systematically destroyed by a campaign of lies, and I felt powerless to stop it because defending myself just made me look guilty and desperate. 3 weeks after the will reading, a process server appeared at my door while I was making breakfast for Lily. I was handed a thick stack of legal documents, a formal lawsuit contesting Mom's will and demanding that the estate be redistributed according to what Margot claimed were Mom's true wishes. The complaint was brutal in its accusations. Margot alleged that I had exercised undue influence over Patricia during her illness, taking advantage of her weakened mental state to manipulate her into changing the will in my favor. She claimed Mom had lacked the mental capacity to make sound decisions during the final months of her life, that the medications had clouded her judgment beyond the point of legal competency. She accused me of deliberately isolating Patricia from other family members to prevent them from seeing what was really happening. There was even a suggestion of possible forgery, claiming that Mom's signature on certain documents looked questionable and should be examined by handwriting experts. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. I had to hire a lawyer, and after researching attorneys who specialized in estate litigation, I settled on Raymond Holbrook, an experienced litigator who came highly recommended but wasn't cheap. His retainer was $5,000, money I had to pull from what remained of my savings, and he warned me that if this went to trial, the costs could easily reach $30,000 or $40,000. Meanwhile, the estate was frozen pending the outcome of the lawsuit, which meant I couldn't sell Mom's house or access any of the investment accounts. I was stuck paying the mortgage and maintenance on a house I couldn't live in because I still had my apartment lease, juggling those expenses on top of my regular bills while trying to keep everything afloat. I had to go back to work at the accounting firm, showing up exhausted and emotionally drained, trying to focus on spreadsheets and tax returns while my personal life was falling apart. The discovery process was invasive and humiliating. Margot's lawyer requested every piece of documentation related to Mom's care, my finances, and our family relationships. I had to turn over medical records, financial statements, text messages, emails, even my personal journal entries from the months Mom was sick. Raymond assured me this was standard procedure and that I had nothing to hide, so I provided everything they asked for. But having strangers comb through the most private and painful period of my life felt like being stripped naked in public. They were looking for any inconsistency, any mistake, anything they could twist into evidence of wrongdoing. Every grocery receipt, every medication log, every bank transaction was scrutinized for signs of theft or deception. Then Margot escalated with her third major attack. She filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services, claiming that even though Mom had passed away, there should be a posthumous investigation into the abuse and neglect ID allegedly perpetrated. Her allegations were specific and horrifying. She claimed I'd stolen Mom's jewelry before her death, pocketing valuable pieces that should have been part of the estate. She said I'd forged checks from Mom's account to pay my own bills, using her money for personal expenses. She insisted I'd prevented her from visiting by lying about Mom's condition or scheduling visits when I knew Margot couldn't make it. The APS investigator was required to follow up despite Mom being deceased, which meant interviewing me, Lily, our neighbors, and the hospice nurses who'd been involved in Mom's care. The investigator was professional but thorough, and I could see the doubt in her eyes at first. The possibility that these accusations might be true. I sat across from her in my living room, answering question after question, providing documentation, giving her names of people who could verify what really happened. The worst part was watching this affect Lily. My 9-year-old daughter didn't fully understand the legal complexities, but she understood that her aunt was saying terrible things about her mother, that people at school were whispering because some parents had seen the social media posts, that suddenly we were the subject of gossip and speculation. Kids can be cruel, and Lily came home crying one day because a classmate had said her mom was a thief who hurt Grandma. She asked me through tears why Aunt Margot hated us, why this was happening, if I was going to jail. I held her and tried to explain that sometimes adults make bad choices, that Aunt Margot was hurting and not thinking clearly. But how do you help a child process the betrayal of a family member Shed once trusted? That night, after I put Lily to bed, I sat on my bathroom floor and cried harder than I had since Mom died. It reached a breaking point, consumed by rage at my sister for extending her cruelty to include my innocent child, for weaponizing grief and family bonds in pursuit of money she didn't even need. Just when I thought I might drown in the darkness, an unexpected ally emerged. Clara Mendez, one of the hospice nurses who'd helped care for Mom during her final weeks, reached out to Raymond and volunteered to testify on my behalf. She provided detailed nursing notes, documenting the exemplary care I'd given, the countless hours I'd spent at Mom's bedside, the gentle and patient way I'd handled even the most difficult tasks. She described Margot's minimal involvement with precise dates and times, the visits that lasted less than an hour, the way Shed posed for photos but avoided actual caregiving. Clara told Raymond that in her 15 years as a hospice nurse, Shed rarely seen a caregiver as dedicated and loving as I'd been, and she was willing to say that under oath in court if necessary. When Raymond told me about Clara's offer, I broke down in his office, overwhelmed by gratitude that at least one person had seen the truth and was brave enough to speak it. That small gesture of support gave me the strength to keep fighting, to believe that maybe the truth would eventually matter more than Margot's lies. But I had no idea that the worst was still ahead, that my sister's next move would bring me closer to total collapse than anything Shed done so far. Raymond called me on a Monday morning in November with news that made my stomach drop. Margot has hired private investigators, he said, his voice tight with concern. They're a firm called Caldwell and Associates, one of the most expensive investigation companies in Boston, known for thoroughness and for digging up information that other firms might miss. Their mission was clear: to find evidence of my supposed fraud and manipulation, to uncover proof that I'd stolen Mom's inheritance through lies and deception. The retainer Margot paid them was probably close to $20,000, money she apparently still had despite her claims of being financially wronged. Raymond warned me that these investigators were good at what they did, that I should be prepared for intensive surveillance and invasive inquiries into every aspect of my life. The surveillance started almost immediately, and it was terrifying to realize I was being watched. I'd see the same black SUV parked down the street from my apartment with tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. When I went to the grocery store or picked Lily up from school, I'd notice a man in casual clothes following at a distance, sometimes photographing me with a long lens camera. I spotted someone sitting in the corner of my regular coffee shop, laptop open but clearly focused on me rather than their screen. The feeling of being constantly observed made me paranoid and anxious. I started second-guessing every action, wondering how it might be interpreted or misrepresented. Taking Lily to the park became stressful because I knew someone was documenting it. Going to work meant being photographed, entering and leaving the building. Even running errands felt like a performance where every move was being recorded and analyzed for signs of wrongdoing. I had to sit Lily down and explain that some people might be taking pictures of us, that it wasn't because we'd done anything wrong, trying to reassure her while my own anxiety skyrocketed. But the surveillance was just the beginning. The investigators spread out across my life, interviewing people in every circle I occupied, and they weren't subtle about their implications. They showed up at my accounting firm asking my coworkers questions about my financial situation, my character, whether I'd ever mentioned needing money or being in debt. They spoke to my neighbors, suggesting that I might be emotionally unstable or an unfit parent, fishing for complaints or concerns. They tracked down my ex-husband and interviewed him, implying that there might be issues with how I was raising Lily, trying to get him to say something negative about my parenting. They even went to Lily's school and spoke with her teachers, claiming they had concerns about the home environment and whether there were signs of stress or instability affecting her education. Each of these conversations left damage in its wake. My coworkers started looking at me differently, probably wondering if there was truth to what they'd been asked. Neighbors who'd been friendly became distant. My ex called demanding to know what was going on, whether he should be worried about Lily's well-being. Then came the fourth major attack, possibly the most damaging yet. Someone, and I had no doubt it was connected to Margot's campaign, filed an anonymous complaint with my employer alleging serious professional misconduct. The complaint claimed I'd been embezzling from client accounts, that I'd committed ethical violations in how I handled confidential information, and that I'd been using company time and resources to deal with my personal legal matters. None of it was true. Not a single accusation had any basis in reality. But my boss, Gerald, had no choice but to launch an internal investigation. Standard protocol required that I be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome, which meant I was suddenly without income at the worst possible time. The humiliation of being escorted out of the office with my belongings in a cardboard box while colleagues watched was almost unbearable. Gerald pulled me aside and said quietly that he didn't believe any of it, that I'd been a model employee for 7 years, but his hands were tied by company policy. I understood, but understanding didn't make it easier to deal with the loss of my paycheck and the destruction of my professional reputation. I was approaching my breaking point. The combination of legal stress, financial pressure, constant surveillance, and systematic destruction of my reputation pushed me into a dark mental space I'd never experienced before. I started having panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night unable to breathe, convinced that I was going to lose everything, including custody of Lily. I couldn't afford therapy, couldn't afford anything beyond bare necessities, so I suffered in silence and tried to hide my deterioration from my daughter. The insomnia got worse, and when I did sleep, I had nightmares about court proceedings where I was found guilty of crimes I didn't commit, about Lily being taken away, about ending up homeless and alone. One particularly bad night, after Lily was asleep, I found myself on my bathroom floor again, considering whether it would just be easier to give up, to offer Margot whatever she wanted to make this nightmare stop. I called a crisis helpline and talked to a volunteer for an hour, crying and trying to make sense of how my life had spiraled so completely out of control. What pulled me back from that edge was something I found while cleaning out some of Mom's belongings I'd been storing in my closet. Tucked inside a photo album was an old journal Mom had kept, and when I flipped through it, I found an entry from about 2 years before she got sick. She'd written about both her daughters, reflecting on their different strengths and personalities. The part about me brought fresh tears. Natalie has always been my strong one, she'd written in her careful handwriting. I failed her in so many ways, favoring the child who needed it less, but she never failed me. She became strong despite my mistakes, not because of anything I gave her. I'm proud of her in ways I never told her enough. That entry reminded me that Mom had seen the truth eventually, that her final will wasn't a mistake or the product of manipulation but rather a clear-eyed acknowledgement of who her daughters really were. It gave me the strength to call Raymond and tell him I was ready to keep fighting, that I wouldn't let Margot break me, no matter how hard she pushed. I had no idea then that the investigators Shed hired to destroy me were about to become the instruments of my salvation, that her most aggressive attack was going to backfire in ways neither of us could have predicted. 4 months into the investigation, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, exhausted from dealing with constant bad news and unwanted calls, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was professional and measured, introducing himself as Thomas Caldwell, the principal investigator from Caldwell and Associates. My heart started racing immediately, assuming this was another attack, another piece of bad news, but his tone was strange, almost uncomfortable. He asked if we could meet in person, just the two of us, without lawyers present. He insisted it was important and that he needed to speak with me directly about something that had come up during their investigation. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that Margot had coached him to record me saying something incriminating, but curiosity and desperation won out. I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a busy coffee shop downtown where there would be plenty of witnesses if this turned into something dangerous. Thomas Caldwell was a man in his early 60s with gray hair and tired eyes that suggested he'd seen more than his share of human ugliness over his career. We sat in a corner booth, and I watched him carefully, trying to read his intentions as he ordered coffee neither of us really wanted. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, and taking a long time to begin speaking. Finally, he leaned forward and said something I never expected to hear. "Miss Hartley, I need to tell you something off the record, something that goes against my professional protocols, but I can't in good conscience stay silent about what we've found." He explained that his team had been hired to investigate me, to find evidence of the fraud and manipulation Margot claimed I'd committed. They'd spent months digging into every aspect of my life, my finances, my behavior during Mom's illness, my relationships with family members and colleagues. They'd interviewed dozens of people, reviewed thousands of documents, followed me around town documenting my daily activities. And after all that extensive investigation, they'd found absolutely nothing that supported Margot's accusations. I was, in his words, clean as a whistle. But then he said something that made my world tilt on its axis. While conducting this investigation, we stumbled onto something we weren't looking for, something much bigger than your mother's will. The thing about thorough investigations is that when you start pulling financial threads, sometimes you uncover patterns you weren't expecting. We had access to family financial records as part of the estate dispute, and we noticed some inconsistencies that didn't involve you at all. They involved your sister. Thomas opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table to me. His hands shook slightly as he did it, and I could see the conflict in his expression, the war between professional ethics and personal integrity. "What I'm about to show you came to light during our legitimate investigation," he said quietly. "We didn't go looking for this specifically, but once we saw the patterns, we couldn't unsee them, and I couldn't pretend I hadn't noticed." The folder contained preliminary findings that made my head spin as I flipped through page after page of financial documents. Margot had created multiple limited liability companies under slight variations of her name, shell corporations with no real business activity but plenty of money flowing through them. There were offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, money being moved in complex patterns designed to hide its origin and destination. Thomas pointed out falsified business expense reports Shed submitted to her employer, claiming reimbursement for trips and purchases that never happened. There were insurance fraud claims, multiple incidents where Shed reported thefts or damages that appeared to be completely fabricated, collecting payouts totaling over $300,000 across several years. The tax evasion was perhaps most damning. Evidence that Shed been underreporting her income by massive amounts, hiding money in ways that would definitely interest the Internal Revenue Service. The total fraud appeared to exceed $800,000, a staggering sum that explained how Shed maintained her luxury lifestyle despite what must have been crushing legitimate expenses. Thomas watched me process this information, and then he explained his decision. "I've been a private investigator for 30 years, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his choice. "I've worked for some morally questionable clients, people who hired me to dig up dirt for divorces or business disputes, and I've always maintained professional detachment. But I can't be part of helping someone this corrupt destroy an innocent person. It goes against everything I believe about justice and truth. Your sister hired us to prove you're a fraud, and instead we discovered that she's the criminal. I can't continue working for her knowing what I know. So officially, I'll be telling her that our investigation found insufficient evidence to support her claims against you. Well, close the case and refund a portion of her retainer. But unofficially, I'm giving you this information. What you do with it is entirely up to you. He pushed the folder closer to me and explained that he had copies of everything, that if anyone questioned how this information came to light, he was prepared to say it emerged during the course of a routine investigation into family finances related to the estate dispute. Had documented his findings properly, followed the evidence where it led, and couldn't be accused of anything unethical. His firm would be insulated, but more importantly, the truth would be available. I sat there stunned, holding this folder that represented the complete inversion of everything Margot had tried to accomplish. Shed hired these investigators to expose me as a liar, and instead they'd exposed her as a massive fraud. The poetic justice was almost too perfect to believe, and I found myself laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the absurdity and the relief. Thomas smiled slightly, the first warmth I'd seen from him. I've been doing this job long enough to know character when I see it, he said. You have it. Your sister doesn't. I've met a lot of people trying to destroy others to cover their own guilt, and she fits that pattern perfectly. Before he left, Thomas gave me his card and told me to call if I needed him to testify about his findings. He refused to accept any final payment from Margot, saying he wouldn't take money from someone like her. He stood up, shook my hand with surprising gentleness, and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone with the folder that would change everything. I sat there for another hour, reading through the documents again and again, making sure I understood what I was looking at, that this wasn't some cruel trick or misunderstanding. But it was real, all of it, documented and verified by professional investigators who had no reason to lie. Margot's perfect life, her luxury lifestyle, her self-righteous crusade against me, all of it was built on a foundation of crime and deception. The sisterhood called me a liar, and a thief was guilty of exactly those crimes on a scale I'd never imagined. I thought about all the times Shed looked down on me, all the comparisons and criticisms, all the ways Shed made me feel small and inadequate, and I realized it had all been projection. She was everything Shed accused me of being, and Shed been so desperate to hide her own crimes that Shed tried to destroy me as a distraction. Now I had the power to fight back, to end her attacks once and for all, and I intended to use it. The next morning, I called Raymond and asked for an emergency meeting. When I walked into his office and placed Thomas Caldwell's folder on his desk, I watched his expression shift from curious to shocked to absolutely delighted as he flipped through the pages. "This is massive," he said, looking up at me with something like awe. "This changes absolutely everything. We're not just defending against her lawsuit anymore. We have the ammunition to end this completely and permanently." He immediately brought in a forensic accountant, a specialist who could verify the findings and prepare them for potential legal action. Over the next week, we built a comprehensive case documenting Margot's fraud, organizing the evidence into a clear timeline that showed years of deliberate criminal activity. The forensic accountant confirmed that the patterns were unmistakable, that no legitimate explanation could account for the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the falsified claims, and the hidden income. Raymond reached out to Margot's lawyer and requested a meeting, implying that we had new information that would impact the estate litigation. Margot agreed, probably thinking we were finally ready to settle on her terms, ready to hand over money to make her go away. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon in Raymond's conference room, and I spent the days leading up to it rehearsing what I would say, how I would handle seeing my sister face to face, knowing what I knew about her crimes. When the day arrived, I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, wanting to project strength and control. Margot walked in looking polished and confident, her designer suit probably costing more than my monthly rent, her hair and makeup perfect as always. She sat across from me with a smug smile, flanked by her lawyer, clearly expecting me to cave under the pressure of her relentless campaign. The small talk was brief and tense. Then Raymond asked if we were ready to discuss settlement terms, and Margot leaned forward eagerly. "Finally ready to do the right thing," she said with false sweetness. "I think 70% of the estate is fair, considering everything I've been through, all the emotional damage caused by your manipulation of our mother. I want the house sold and the proceeds divided with me getting the larger share. I want access to the investment accounts. And I want a formal written apology acknowledging what you did." She sat back, satisfied, like this was already decided. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd tormented me for months, who'd tried to destroy my life and hurt my daughter, who'd wrapped her crimes in a cloak of victimhood and self-righteousness. Then I spoke, my voice calm and clear. "No, Margot. I'm not settling. Actually, I'm here to give you an opportunity to drop your lawsuit immediately and walk away before this gets much worse for you." She laughed, actually laughed, like Id told a hilarious joke. "Why on earth would I do that?" she asked, glancing at her lawyer with an expression that said, "Can you believe her audacity? You're going to drop this because your private investigators found something very interesting," I replied, sliding the thick folder across the polished conference table. "Not about me. About you." I watched her face as she opened the folder, watched the color drain from her cheeks, watched her hands start to tremble as she recognized what she was looking at. Page after page of her financial crimes. Documented and analyzed. Laid out in undeniable detail. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the insurance fraud, the tax evasion, all of it compiled into a comprehensive record of criminal activity spanning years. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice suddenly small and frightened. She tried to flip through the pages quickly, but her hands were shaking too badly. "Your investigators," I said, and I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "The ones you hired to prove I was lying. Caldwell and Associates. They spent months digging into family finances for your lawsuit, and they found all of this. The fraud, the hidden money, the fake insurance claims, everything. They brought it directly to me because they couldn't in good conscience help someone this corrupt destroy an innocent person." Raymond jumped in, his lawyer voice crisp and authoritative. "This folder contains documentation of fraud totaling over $800,000. Evidence of multiple insurance fraud claims. Evidence of tax evasion that would definitely interest the IRS. Evidence of embezzlement from your own employer. We've had a forensic accountant verify all of it. It's real, it's comprehensive, and it's damning." Margot's lawyer was speed reading through the documents, his face growing increasingly grim. He leaned over and whispered urgently in Margot's ear, probably telling her exactly how much trouble she was in, how serious these allegations were. But Margot wasn't ready to accept defeat. She tried to bluster, her voice rising in pitch and volume. "This is fake!" she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "You fabricated all of this. You're trying to frame me because you know you're guilty, and this is your desperate attempt to turn things around." Raymond smiled coldly. "Actually, this came directly from Caldwell and Associates, the investigators you hired and paid $20,000 to. We can call Thomas Caldwell right now and have him confirm it if you'd like. Has prepared to testify about his findings. Would you like us to arrange that?" The bluff collapsed, Margot's face crumpled, and I could see her scrambling for a new strategy, a new angle. Then I laid out my terms, the ultimatum that would end this nightmare one way or another. "You have two options, Margot. Option 1, you drop the lawsuit immediately. You post a public apology retracting your accusations against me. You stay away from me and Lily permanently, and you get yourself into therapy to deal with whatever is broken inside you that made you do all of this. Option 2, I take this evidence to the district attorney, the IRS, the FBI, and every insurance company you defrauded. I notify your employer about the embezzlement. I make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done. You'll face criminal prosecution, prison time, complete financial ruin, and the destruction of the reputation you care about so much. You have 48 hours to decide." That's when Margot tried her fifth and final attack. One last desperate attempt to flip the situation. She stood up, pointing at me with a shaking finger, and screamed that I was blackmailing her, that this was extortion and illegal, and I'd go to jail for threatening her. Her lawyer tried to calm her down, but she kept ranting, cycling through different accusations and threats. "You're going to pay for this," she shouted. "I'll tell everyone you made this all up. I'll sue you for defamation. You were always jealous of me, always wanted what I had, and now you're trying to destroy me because Mom finally saw through your act." The veneer of perfection shattered completely, and underneath was rage and fear, and something that looked like genuine mental instability. Then, in a moment of raw honesty that shocked everyone in the room, she broke down crying and revealed the truth behind her desperation. "I needed that money," she sobbed. "I'm drowning in debt. Credit cards, $300,000 I can't pay. I'm going to lose my townhouse. I've been embezzling from my own company just to keep up appearances. The insurance fraud was to pay bills. Everything's falling apart, and I thought if I got Mom's money I could fix it all. I could keep everything together. Nobody would have to know." The confession hung in the air, and I felt something shift inside me. Not sympathy exactly, but a kind of sad understanding of how far she'd fallen, how desperate she'd become. Still, she'd hurt me and Lily, had tried to destroy us to cover her own failures, and that couldn't be excused or forgotten. I remained calm, channeling all the strength I'd built over these horrible months. "You did this to yourself, Margot," I said quietly. "Not me. I gave you chances to stop, to back off, to handle Mom's death with some dignity. You chose to attack me instead. You made me lose sleep, my job temporarily, my reputation, my peace of mind. You hurt my daughter, an innocent 9-year-old who never did anything to you. You waged war against your own family because you couldn't face your own failures. This isn't about jealousy or greed. This is about consequences for your actions." I stood up to leave, and Raymond handed Margot's lawyer a formal document outlining the settlement terms. 48 hours, I repeated. "After that, I make the calls, and you face everything you've been running from." 36 hours later, Margot's lawyer called Raymond with her answer. She'd signed the settlement agreement. The lawsuit contesting Mom's will was dropped with prejudice, meaning she could never file it again. She posted a public apology on social media, carefully worded to avoid admitting criminal activity but acknowledging that her accusations against me had been unfounded and that she regretted the pain she'd caused. It wasn't the full truth, but it was enough to begin repairing my reputation. The Facebook group Justice for Patricia was deleted, and family members started reaching out with confused messages asking what had really happened. I made the difficult decision not to pursue criminal charges against Margot, not because she deserved mercy, but because I wanted peace more than I wanted revenge. I'd seen what hatred and obsession had done to my sister, how it had consumed her and destroyed her life, and I refused to let those same emotions poison mine. With the lawsuit resolved, the estate was finally released from probate. I could access Mom's accounts and make decisions about the house. I put the property on the market, needing a fresh start without the memories of those painful final months, and it sold quickly for a good price. The money from the sale, combined with the investment accounts, gave me financial security I'd never had before. I paid off Raymond's legal fees, set up a proper trust fund for Lily with enough for 4 years at a good university, plus graduate school if she wanted it, bought a modest but comfortable house in a better school district with a backyard where Lily could play, and established an emergency fund that would protect us from future crises. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, wasn't constantly worried about unexpected expenses, wasn't sacrificing my own needs for basic survival. But Margot's consequences came regardless of my decision not to prosecute. Her employer discovered her embezzlement independently when an internal audit was triggered by something unrelated, and they had no qualms about pressing charges. She was fired immediately and arrested within a week. The IRS opened an investigation after receiving an anonymous tip, which I later learned came from Thomas Caldwell Hood, felt obligated to report what had discovered. The insurance companies Shed defrauded began their own investigations and filed civil suits to recover their losses. Within 2 months, Margot lost her townhouse to foreclosure, declared bankruptcy, and was facing criminal charges that carried a potential sentence of 5 to 10 years in prison. Her perfect life unraveled completely, and while I felt no joy in watching her suffer, I couldn't deny a sense of justice being served. Then, while going through the last boxes of Mom's papers to close out the estate, I found something that revealed an even deeper level of Margot's betrayal. Hidden in a folder of old tax returns was documentation that Mom's actual lawyer, Richard Pemberton, had preserved as a precaution. During Mom's final weeks, Margot had attempted to execute a plan to change the will entirely, to cut me out completely and leave everything to herself. Shed forged a power of attorney document, using letterhead Shed copied from Richard's office, and creating what looked like an official legal instrument, giving her complete control over Mom's affairs. Shed presented this document to her lawyer friend, the one Shed brought to Mom's house, and tried to have a new will drafted that would supersede Mom's real wishes. Richard had caught the forgery when Margot's friend contacted him for Mom's medical records to establish capacity, and had refused to cooperate and warned her that what she was attempting was illegal. Margot had tried to steal everything before Mom even died, had been planning this betrayal from the moment she realized Mom was going to change the will in my favor. The revelation hit me hard, forcing me to confront the full scope of my sister's deception. This wasn't just about money or jealousy or desperation. Margot had actively plotted to disinherit me, to erase me from Mom's final wishes, even before Mom had passed away. Shed forged legal documents and enlisted others in her scheme. Every tear Shed cried, every accusation Shed made, every claim of being the wronged party, all of it had been built on a foundation of calculated fraud. I showed the documents to Raymond, who confirmed that this would have been grounds for criminal prosecution if I'd wanted to pursue it, but I was exhausted from fighting and just wanted to move forward. Still, it gave me clarity about who Margot really was, stripped away any remaining guilt or doubt about how I'd handled the situation. The truth gradually spread through our extended family as pieces of Margot's story came to light through legal proceedings and gossip. Cousins who'd shunned me started calling to apologize, admitting they'd been manipulated. Aunt Helen showed up at my door in tears, begging forgiveness for not trusting me, explaining that Margot had borrowed $20,000 from her years ago with promises to repay it and never had, but Helen had convinced herself it was just a misunderstanding until now. Uncle James sent a long email acknowledging that Margot had played on family loyalties and twisted facts, and that he should have investigated before taking sides. There was a family gathering, awkward and emotional, where people publicly acknowledged their mistakes and welcomed me back into the fold. It didn't erase the months of isolation and pain, but it helped to know that the truth had finally reached everyone who mattered. At work, the internal investigation concluded that the allegations against me were completely baseless and likely filed maliciously by someone with a personal vendetta. Gerald called me into his office, offered a formal apology from the firm, and presented me with back pay for the time I'd been on administrative leave, plus a promotion to senior accountant with a significant raise. I declined the promotion, explaining that I needed less stress in my life right now, not more responsibility. But I appreciated the gesture and was grateful to have my reputation restored among my colleagues. They'd all watched me go through hell, and now they understood why. And there was a new respect in how they treated me. Lily slowly recovered from the trauma of those difficult months. She was resilient in the way children can be, but she needed therapy to process what Shed witnessed. The stress of watching her mother suffer, the confusion of family betrayal, the bullying Shed endured at school. We found a wonderful child psychologist who helped her understand that none of this was her fault, that families sometimes have problems that aren't anyone's fault but still cause pain. Lily grew from the experience in ways I wished she hadn't needed to, developing compassion and emotional intelligence beyond her years. One evening, while we were unpacking boxes in our new house, she hugged me and said something that made me cry. "Mom, you showed me what real strength looks like. Not the pretend kind that Aunt Margot had, but the real kind where you keep going even when everything is awful." I'm proud of you. Coming from my 9-year-old daughter, those words meant more than any legal victory or financial settlement ever could. 1 year after Mom's death, 1 year after this nightmare began, I stood in the kitchen of my new home watching sunlight stream through windows that faced a small garden I'd planted myself. Lily was at the table doing homework, humming quietly to herself, healthy and happy and thriving in her new school. My life had stabilized in ways I hadn't thought possible during the darkest moments. The house was warm and filled with light, a sanctuary we'd created together, free from the shadows of the past. My finances were secure, the job was going well, and most importantly, I'd found peace. Not the absence of pain exactly, but rather the ability to carry what had happened without being crushed by its weight. The healing journey had been gradual and ongoing. Therapy helped both Lily and me process the trauma of betrayal, the complex grief of losing Mom while simultaneously being attacked by Margot, the difficulty of trusting people after experiencing such profound deception. My therapist helped me understand that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, that I could release my anger without inviting my sister back into my life, that healthy boundaries are a form of self-love rather than punishment. I learned to let go of the need for Margot to understand what she'd done, or to genuinely feel remorse, accepting that her journey was separate from mine, and I couldn't control whether she ever found redemption. Margot eventually took a plea deal after her lawyer convinced her that going to trial would result in a much longer sentence. She pleaded guilty to fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion charges in exchange for 4 years in prison, substantial restitution payments, and 5 years of probation after release. She was currently serving her sentence at a minimum security facility about 2 hours away. 6 months into her incarceration, I received a letter forwarded through Raymond. Margot's handwriting covered 3 pages, and for once, it seemed genuinely honest rather than manipulative. She took full responsibility for everything she'd done, acknowledged that her actions had been calculated and cruel, and admitted that jealousy had consumed her since childhood. "You were always the better person," she wrote. "You had integrity and strength and kindness, all the things I pretended to have but never really developed. I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand that Mom finally saw it, so I tried to destroy you. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover what I owe you, but I am sorry. I hope someday you can find peace, even if you never forgive me." I read the letter several times, analyzing it for signs of manipulation, but it felt different from her previous communications. Prison had apparently forced her to confront things she'd spent her life avoiding. Still, I didn't respond. I wasn't ready for contact, might never be ready, and that was okay. I put the letter in a drawer and chose to focus on my own healing rather than her redemption. Maybe someday, years from now, we might have some kind of relationship, but today wasn't that day, and I'd learned that I didn't owe her anything, not even hope for our future as sisters. I released her from my daily thoughts, refused to let her occupy mental space she hadn't earned, and moved forward with my life. Unexpected blessings emerged from the wreckage. Clara Mendez, the hospice nurse who testified for me, became a close friend, someone who understood loss and caregiving and the complexities of family dysfunction. We met for coffee regularly, and she'd become like a surrogate aunt to Lily. Thomas Caldwell checked in occasionally, sending brief emails asking how I was doing, sharing that he'd retired from investigation work and was spending more time with his grandchildren, telling me that meeting me had reminded him why he'd gotten into this business in the first place, to find truth and protect the innocent. Raymond Holbrook gave me a significant discount on his final bill and told me that working on my case had restored his faith in the legal system's ability to deliver justice. These people who'd started as professionals became my chosen family, proof that sometimes crisis reveals who your real allies are, and that family is defined by who shows up rather than who shares your blood. Mom's trust fund for Lily, combined with what I'd been able to add from the estate settlement, now held enough money for 4 years at a good university, with some left over for graduate school, if she chose that path. Patricia's final gift was finally realized, not as a source of conflict, but as a foundation for Lily's future. I kept some of Mom's jewelry, the pieces I remembered her wearing when I was young, and I wore her wedding ring sometimes as a reminder of complicated love and eventual understanding. I told Lily stories about her grandmother, carefully choosing the good memories, painting a picture of a flawed woman who'd tried her best and had found clarity at the end. Margot never asked for her share of the jewelry, and I didn't offer it, another boundary that felt right. The deep lessons from this experience had changed me in fundamental ways. I'd learned that truth has a weight that lies cannot carry forever, that deception eventually collapses under its own burden. I'd seen how character reveals itself under pressure, how crisis strips away pretense and shows what people are really made of. Karma isn't about cosmic revenge or divine punishment, it's simply consequence, the inevitable result of choices made and paths taken. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest freedom because they force you to stop hoping for something that was never going to happen and start building something real instead. And family, real family, is who shows up and stays, not who happens to share your genetics. I reflected often on the strange justice of how this had all played out. Margot had hired investigators to prove I was a liar, and instead they'd proven I was the only one telling the truth. She'd spent tens of thousands of dollars on a weapon that turned around and struck her instead. The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor about hubris and projection. Every accusation She'd made against me had been true about herself, and her desperate attempts to hide that truth had been what exposed it. I didn't believe in fate exactly, but I appreciated the symmetry. One evening, Lily and I were baking cookies in our sunny kitchen, flour dusting the counters and the smell of vanilla filling the air. She looked up at me with her serious brown eyes and asked a question I'd been expecting. "Do you think Aunt Margot will ever be different? Will she be a better person when she gets out of prison?" I considered how to answer honestly without making her cynical. "Maybe," I said, measuring chocolate chips into the bowl. "People can change if they really want to, if they do the hard work of facing themselves and their mistakes. But we don't have to wait around to find out. We build our own life now, create our own happiness, and choose peace every single day. If she changes, that's wonderful for her, but it doesn't change what we're doing here." Lily nodded, processing this, and then gave me one of her fierce hugs. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" she whispered. I held her tight and smiled. "We're already okay, sweetheart. We're already okay." The final reflection came to me late one night after Lily was asleep. As I sat in my living room sipping tea and thinking about the journey from that hospital bed where Mom died to this peaceful home where I'd finally found stability. I'd learned I was stronger than I'd ever known, capable of enduring attacks that would have broken the person I used to be. I'd lost a sister but gained myself, discovered my own worth independent of anyone else's validation. I'd found out what I was made of under pressure, and I liked what I discovered. My life was now built on truth rather than the need for approval, on genuine relationships rather than obligatory family connections. Most importantly, I'd learned to choose my own peace over other people's drama, to protect my daughter and myself from toxicity even when it wore a familiar face. My mother's will hadn't just been about money or houses or investment accounts. It had been about Patricia finally seeing me clearly after a lifetime of looking past me toward my sister. Her final act had been to acknowledge my worth, to balance scales that had been tipped unfairly since childhood, to give me tools to build a better life. And in the end, despite all of Margot's efforts to overturn that will and destroy its intended recipient, everyone had seen the truth. The lawyers, the investigators, the family members, the co-workers, the community, everyone who mattered eventually understood who I really was and who Margot had always been. That recognition, that vindication, mattered more than any amount of money ever could. So let me ask you, have you ever been accused of something you didn't do by someone who was actually guilty of it themselves? Have you experienced that kind of projection and betrayal from someone close to you? Drop your stories in the comments below, because I'd love to hear how you handled it and what you learned. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that truth eventually wins and that karma really does come around, please hit that like button and share this video with anyone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories about family drama, betrayal, and justice. Your support means everything and helps others find these stories when they need them most. Thank you for listening to my story, for taking this journey with me through the darkness and back into the light. I hope it reminded you that you're stronger than you think, that standing up for truth is always worth it even when it's hard, and that sometimes the weapons used against you become the very instruments of your freedom. To everyone out there fighting their own battles against lies and manipulation, keep going. The truth has weight. It will hold you up even when everything else falls away. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember that the best revenge is building a life so good that you forget why you wanted revenge in the first place. Until next time, stay strong and stay true.